All right, you guys all just came from the attorney session, right? How was it? Great. Anybody know any good attorney jokes? Turns out there's actually only 3 attorney jokes. The rest are true. So, all right. Well, I'm glad you guys are here. I know the next talk coming up is the real estate commission talk, and that's always a great one. So I'm going to be very respectful of your time. This is a talk I do that normally is a 60-minute talk. So we may skip through some slides, but we'll make sure we get to the good meat and potatoes of why you guys are here. Sound good?
Yes.
Okay. Awesome. Let's jump right in. So by the end of this session, we're going to be doing a few things here. Number one, we're going to identify 5 barriers to your growth. We're going to learn practical ways to break through each of those barriers and understand the role that makes scaling possible. And that's the main thing we're going to talk about today is the integrator role. Anybody here use that term now or familiar with that term, integrator? Okay. Anybody have no clue what I'm talking about when I say integrator? You can feel free to say so. Okay. So that's mainly what we're going to be hitting on today. And then you'll leave with some clear steps on how to put these things into action. That's always really important to me when I speak, is to give you guys the meat and potatoes and give you guys something you can walk out of here with, okay? All right, so a little bit about me. Leslie already introduced me, but just so you guys know, I'm a property manager just like you guys. I own my property management company actually right here in Charlotte for 15 years. We went multi-market, grew to about 1,000 units before I sold in 2022. And now this is all I do now at Better Who is coaching and consulting as well as global staffing work exclusively for property management companies just like you guys. So yeah, that's blah, blah, blah. There's my resume. So, all right. So let's jump in here. So these are the things we're going to be talking about here today. We want you guys to figure out if you're utilizing this integrator role correctly, then it should be giving you clarity in your business, alignment, vision alignment with your execution. Okay? Now, this is from, where is this from? This is from the National Apartment Association 2023. 76% of property managers say operational efficiency is their #1 challenge. Can anybody here resonate with that? Yeah, operational efficiency. And it's so important, right? Because it affects so many levers in your business. And so this is why if we don't get this one role right in your business, you're going to continue to struggle with some of these operational efficiencies. All right, so now there's going to be, I promise you there's going to be 5 barriers we talk about, but I also told you this is normally a 60-minute talk. Today we went from 45 to 30, so we're going to go pretty quickly through the first 4 barriers, but they lay the foundation basically for why, in order to break through those barriers, you really need this integrator role, which will be the 5th barrier that we end up talking about. Okay, so barrier number 1 is really, it starts with leadership and mindset. But this is a lot of the work we do when we do with coaching, is it just starts there, right, for leadership in terms of how are you going to lead your team. I had one conversation today where we established, okay, so you're a little bit of a control freak, right? And so some of you guys can probably relate with that, right? When you start to say things that basically imply, well, nobody can do it the way I can do it, right? That type of mindset is understandable. We've all been there in some capacity, but you will never scale with that mindset, right? It will always hold you back with that mindset. So when you have that mindset, particularly if you're here as a business owner or a key decision maker in the business, you're the bottleneck if you have this mindset, right? And you're leading from the wrong seat is a lot of times what happens here, right? And this is where we need to figure out what leadership needs to look throughout your organization. And then your growth is going to stall. Right? Again, you're only going to be able to get so big if everything has to run through one or several key people. Okay. So again, we're going to go kind of quickly through some of these initial barriers so we can make sure we get to the other stuff. Just little things here. Oftentimes, this is how we get started when I'm talking to somebody is, especially if you're a smaller company, but even if you're a bigger company, leadership starts with leading yourself first, right? And this is really important. You want to lead yourself in your own mindset, in your own daily habits, and show up how you want to be leading your team in that regard. Delegate by outcome, right? So a lot of times, and this is a key mistake, like a lot of times when people think about delegation, they're delegating tasks, which is understandable, and you do have to have some capacity in which you're delegating tasks. But at the end of the day, you want to be measuring people by their results, right? Not by their activities. And that's what good leadership looks like. You show up and you cast the vision and you say, hey, here's where we need to get to. Here's what success looks like. Here's how we know we will have achieved on this vision. Now you come up with the steps, you come up with the execution to get us there, right? So delegate by outcome. All right, some tips around this type here is A lot of times in a business, you're stalling because people always feel like they have to come to you for the answer to the question, whatever the question might be. So if you're experiencing that right now, I mean, maybe you've experienced it even today while you've been here. I mean, how many of you have gotten an email, a call, or a text or something that like needed your attention today? Okay, so that's part of the issue, right? Is you have to stop being the answer person, right? You have to let your team fail a little bit to get to where they need to get to. So part of what that can look like in the beginning especially is when your team asks you a question, you ask them a question back. Really simple one, put this in your vocabulary, well, what would you do? What do you recommend we do here, right? One of the things that my business partner Jay is in the back, he likes to talk a lot about is this kind of 1-3-1 idea, right? Come to me with one problem, 3 potential solutions, and the one that you recommend, right, of those solutions, right? So start training your team to think that way, and that starts with asking them good questions. And then by doing that, you're going to be building ownership over those problems and stop this dependency on you to solve problems. All right, barrier number 2 is going to be around financial constraints. Anytime I ever start working with a new property management client, I always like to get right into the weeds on money right out of the gate. And so if you don't know certain numbers like your revenue per unit, this is a really key number to understand. And so a lot of times, like if we sat down together for just 3 minutes and I asked you a few key economic questions, you would think I was a crystal ball when I then start telling you like, oh, I bet you're struggling with this, this, and this. And you'd be like, yeah, how did you know? Like, yeah, because that's the pattern when you have these financial constraints in your business. So, there's a benchmarking study that NARPM put out a few years ago. And, some things that came out of that benchmarking study is that depending on your average rental rate, your revenue per unit should be some percentage of that. And so typically what we like to see is, a minimum of somewhere between around $250 to $350 revenue per unit. And this is okay for me to say out loud because this is not price fixing. I'm not telling you what fee to charge or how much to charge on a certain fee. I'm just telling you as a business operator, how much money should your business be bringing in? And if it's not bringing in that kind of money, you're hamstrung. You can't invest in the resources you need to invest in. You can't invest in the staff that you need. You can't invest in the tech stack that you want. And you can't deliver the level of service that you want to deliver to your clients. And so what you don't want to do, like we never want to have a client who's a slumlord, right? Well, I mean, most clients who are slumlords, like they're not trying to be slumlords, but they got themselves in a situation because they have a property that can't produce the amount of money it needs to produce, right? We can do the same thing with our property management companies. If they're not producing the kind of revenue it needs to produce, we're going to kind of be like a slumlord property manager. We're not going to be able to deliver what we want to deliver. So, know your numbers, understand, and you don't have to be the one that you don't have to be your own financial guru in your own company, but you need to make sure you have a way that you're looking at these things, your P&L, your cash flow. A few key metrics that I always like to hit on is revenue per unit and DLER. DLER stands for direct labor efficiency rate. It answers this question. For every dollar you spend on operational staff, how many dollars are you generating in revenue as a business? At a floor, at a bare minimum, you want that number to be 2.5. To flip that on its head, what that means is you don't want to be spending more than 40% at most of your revenue on operational staff. Ideally, that number would be more like around a 4, which would mean you'd be hitting more like 25% of your revenue is on your operational staff. So if you're here today and you're like, man, I'm actually spending like 50%, of our revenue as a company on operational staff, you're probably not profitable, and that's a problem. All right, there's some fees that we could get into, but we're not going to get into that today. As a matter of fact, the last time I spoke here in North Carolina, I don't know if any of you guys were here, I had a whole talk on fees. That was a lot of fun. And so something I like to talk about, we're not going to get into it today. So barrier number 3 is basically right people, right seats. And this is half the battle, by the way. If you take the time to understand what are the unique abilities, what are the superpowers of every member of my team, what seats need to exist in my team, and then if I understand everybody's unique abilities, I'll have an understanding of who needs to sit in which seat. And if you take the time to do this and then continually refine it, then you have made a lot of progress in your business if that's the only thing you take away today. Right people, right seats. There's a lot more we could say about that. But again, we're going to go quickly through this part of the presentation. So when you're not doing right people, right seats, you have a lot. This is that thing earlier. 76% of property managers said their number one problem is operational efficiency. This is why. When you don't have right people, right seats, you're not going to have operational efficiency. You're going to have slippage. And so you want to avoid that. So again, we're going to go kind of quickly through this part here. All right, so some questions to ask like of your team as you're going through like what their job roles are and what you guys as a company are trying to accomplish is, do they get it? Do they want it? Do they have the capacity to get this thing done? Are their KPIs clear? And a lot of us here aren't even clear on our own KPIs. And so how can your team be expected to know what success looks like if you're not giving them a tool by which to measure their own success, right? So a key performance indicator, every person on your team deserves to have at least 1 to 3 key performance indicators so that you can have a clear conversation with them about like, yeah, we're hitting these numbers. And look, when they're not hitting these numbers, non-judgmental curiosity. Non-judgmental curiosity, no blame, no shame, right? And that's what good leadership starts with. If you're talking to somebody, they're not hitting their numbers, you start by looking at yourself in the mirror first as their leader and say, okay, well, how did I fail in this situation? Then you start by looking at systems and processes. Like, okay, did we have a process? Did we have training? Is it clear? Do they know what to do? And then you start looking at capacity, right? Were they just overworked? Right? And then if you're starting to answer all those questions and they're still failing on the job, you still are not blaming the person. You might be blaming the seat. Like, do I just have them in the wrong seat? Maybe they should be doing something else in my company. So you got to go through all that before you get to a place of finally deciding, hey, you actually don't have a seat on our bus anymore. All right, barrier number 4 is around systems and processes, right? Anybody here using a process software like Lead Simple or Apply or Process Street? Something like that. So, if you're not doing anything like that, I encourage you to look into it. I don't think any of those vendors are here, but I'm pretty knowledgeable on this. Anybody who wants to talk to me about this type of stuff, that's always a fun topic. The main thing to know too, by the way, depending on where you are in your business, is you can talk to a lot of other property managers and they can make it sound super sexy, this thing that they've built out with their, automated AI and systems and process and all that. And you may not be there. You don't have to be there. That doesn't have to be where you walk out of here to be today, right? But if you don't have like any SOPs documented at all, that's the place to start, right? It can just be a static document. It can just be Google Docs in a drive somewhere. At least people know where to go reference it. We're all on the same page. And then over time, you can start turning that into checklists and then automation and adding more and more sophistication to it. So this is kind of what this says here: document, streamline, automate. I have a whole separate talk I do sometimes that I call the process, right? Which is like, if you don't have a process yet, what's the process you need to build out your processes? And those systems create freedom, right? A lot of us here are walking around with a lot of institutional knowledge in our heads. That's not freedom, right? And this is why, by the way, everybody's having to ask each other questions all the time, because so much stuff is sitting in your heads, right? So you want to get good at documentation and at these systems. If you're using an AppFolio or Rentvine or whatever you're using, like, one thing that can always be a struggle is getting people to put good notes in the system, right? But that's really important. Those notes need to be there so that, again, it'll create freedom for everybody else involved. All right, we're going to jump ahead here and try to get to our integrator part of the talk. This is a term that, if you're familiar with EOS, Entrepreneurial Operating System, or the book Traction, they use this term a lot, and they talk a lot about visionary and integrator at the top of the accountability chart. And by the way, if you go to their website, to eosworldwide.com, I think it is, they have a great quiz on there called the Visionary Integrator Quiz. And it's really a cool one to take. It'll give you an understanding, and maybe anybody else on your team that you want to do it with, of understanding, like, where do I fall on this? And it turns out, actually, and this part is a little surprising for some folks, that visionaries are kind of a dime a dozen, right? It's pretty easy to come up with ideas. Like, all of us are, we can do that to some degree, right? But integrators are actually a lot more rare. These are the people that get the execution done. And so we'll talk more about that. One thing I want to talk about here at the outset, because a lot of people, even if you've heard the term integrator, they actually misunderstand the definition a little bit. A lot of people conflate integrator with operations director. And that's not what an integrator is. Now, you might have somebody that sits in both those seats at the same time, and that's not that uncommon. But again, those are two different roles. And by the way, that idea in general is not uncommon. Whatever size company you are, most likely you have multiple people that's sitting in multiple seats at the same time. And that's actually an important thing to do. And that's a big difference, by the way, between creating what I call, or what EOS calls, an accountability chart and what corporate America typically would just call an org chart. Because an org chart primarily answers the question of who reports to who. Okay, but an accountability chart is actually answering the question of what roles exist in my company. And it's really an important thing to do, as opposed to you sitting here and saying, well, here's my job description, I do all these things. It's actually more important to say, well, here are all of the roles that exist. I happen to sit in 3 of them right now. And the reason why that's such an important exercise is because you might look at the 3 that you're sitting in and saying, that only one of those is one that I really want and should be sitting in. Okay, so you're sitting in 2 right now. Now it gives you clarity, and you can start to come up with a path of okay, what do I need to do to get myself out of these other 2 roles? So that's what I mean when I say you might have somebody that happens to be both an integrator and an operations director. So if an integrator is not an operations director, what is an integrator? Well, the 3 main functions of any business is finance, operations, and growth, or what we would call sales and marketing, right? And you may have other things too, but these are the 3 core functions of any business. And most things will lead up to those 3 things, right? So you may have a BDM on your team, you may have a marketing person on your team. On the ops side, that's probably going to be the biggest part of your accountability or your org chart, because you may have maintenance folks and leasing folks, you may have in-house maintenance sits over there. You have trust accounting work to do over there. You have property managers, assistant property managers, talking to clients, tenants, whatever, right? So you have all this complexity that may exist in the operations side, and that's why you may need an operations director. But then you also have finance, right? And in our business, finance is slightly complicated because we both have our corporate finance and trust accounting finance, and those are 2 really completely different things, right? And so some of your trust accounting stuff might sort of fit in operations, but you're definitely going to have this corporate finance piece where you need to understand the stuff we were talking about earlier in terms of your P&Ls and your cash flow and your DLER and all your financial metrics and all of these types of things. Well, so what's the job of an integrator? The job of an integrator is to integrate those 3 core functions of the business so that they're all working together. So your integrator actually sits above your growth team, your operations team, and your finance team. And so their job is to answer questions like, and this is one we all struggle with, where does sales begin, or where does sales end and ops begin, right? Common pain point, right? If you have somebody out there that their job is to go out and sign up new clients and sign up doors, and then somebody else's job is to onboard, it's oh wait, who's supposed to do which part? Who's gonna go visit the property? Who's gonna get the PMA signed? Who's gonna fill out the onboarding form? Who's gonna enter the data in AppFolio? Et cetera, right? And so these are, there's no clear right or wrong answer. It could look different for any of you, but an integrator would help answer a question like that, right? Or you pull in finance, you might need to understand, oh, okay, well, hey, we have all of this operations team, but we're not as profitable as we need to be. Why? Let's analyze what's happening. What does the DLER look like, right? And whatever the answer to that DLER question is how do we fix this? Do we need more revenue? Do we need less labor? Do we need different labor, right? So integrators are going to help do all that. All of the systems and processes stuff that I said earlier, that's Integrator 101, right? So, whether you do or don't have a systems or a process software, an integrator's job would be to help facilitate those things and get those to look where they need to look like. So, as we say here on this slide that you see, the role for the integrator here is it turns the vision into execution. And it's really important too, by the way, how many of you guys, you already pretty clearly know, you're a visionary, you have lots of ideas, you love to share your ideas. Is that anybody here pretty clearly? Okay. So a lot of you guys, right, this is what happens. You come to a conference like this, and then you show back to the office on Friday or Monday or whatever, and you're like, guys, I saw this attorney, and I saw the real estate commission, I saw this guy Matt, we got these 20 new things that we need to get done today, right? And that can be really overwhelming for your team. They're like, whoa, I need you to slow down. And so that's a great job of an integrator to say, okay, I hear you. Those are 20 ideas that you have, right? Let's look at them. Let's figure out which ones make the cut that maybe we need to do today, maybe we don't. Which ones could go in our parking lot? And then of the ones we've decided, yes, that makes the priority, okay, what do we need to get it done? Do we need money? Do we need people? Do we need software? What are the resources we need? How long is it going to take? Who on the team is going to be involved? Do we even have the capacity to do that right now? We're about to enter busy leasing season, right? Like, these are all things your integrator will think about that as a visionary, we tend to not really think about those things, right? So everybody getting the idea here? Is this tracking? Okay. So here's the problem, right? And some of this I kind of just described, right? The visionary whiplash is kind of what I just described. Constant new ideas, it confuses the team. Whether you mean to be or not, you're sort of pulling them in different directions all the time, and it creates this whiplash effect. Lack of translation. And this can be hard, right? As a visionary, you want to cast a vision, explain where you're going, but it can be hard for your team to understand and get vision alignment with you. And then that can be very frustrating for you as a visionary, because you understand it really well in your head. You know exactly what you're picturing this thing needs to look like when you get there, but your team doesn't necessarily understand. And so then you're constantly butting heads, and maybe they're trying to do the thing, and you're like, no, not that. Right, and this is where an integrator really helps, because they can translate that vision into an executable plan. And then the accountability gap. Visionaries tend to not be that awesome at holding people accountable, right? Because we're more like, hey, like, here's the thing, and then you've moved on to the next thing, right? Like the golden retriever, right? Whereas an integrator is generally going to be better at things like those KPIs, those feedback loops that exist in your company, and holding people accountable to what needs to happen to get to where you're trying to get to. By the way, who here has, based on what I've said so far, you're like, yeah, we very clearly have an integrator on our team right now. Okay, so 2 people, 3 people. Okay, awesome. And by the way, going back to the role thing, what I would say to the rest of you who didn't raise your hand is you actually do have an integrator on your team right now. You just don't really know who they are, and they may not be high functioning. But the role exists in your company whether you realize it or not, right? It does. And so it's one of those things of like, do you want to happen by accident or happen on purpose? So take that as one of your takeaways today here is like, okay, I want it to happen on purpose. And again, it goes back to the idea I said before. It could be you're here as a visionary and you're like, I kind of suck at what you're describing, but you might have to sit in that seat temporarily until you figure out what happened and own it, right? All right, so what does an integrator really do? Well, the execution piece that we talked about, right? So they can take that vision that the visionary has and they can make it happen. Execute the plan, manage the P&L, run your weekly progress meetings, ensure that day-to-day consistency, follow up with people, check in, are things happening the way they're supposed to be happening? And then alignment, making sure, and this is really core, the alignment piece, right? So we're gonna get vision alignment to make sure everybody is tracking with the same ideas here. We already talked about this idea of filter owner, the owner idea into feasibility, clarifying priorities, because as a visionary, we can feel like everything is all a priority all at once. Just like our clients try to tell us that all the time, right? Is that, and this is one of the problems with property management, right? Is everything's an emergency all the time if you ask some of our clients or tenants, right? But when you have the right structures in place, you can, the truth is, and sometimes we don't do a good job of admitting this to ourselves, there's actually almost no true emergencies in property management. And everybody tries to convince us otherwise, but there's almost nothing that can come up today that can't wait till tomorrow, right? And if it can't wait till tomorrow, they probably called the wrong person. They probably were supposed to call 911, okay? So, but an integrator will help get that going and help everybody understand, like, hey, I know this feels big and important, but it's not actually the most important thing today, okay? Accountability, again, we talked a lot about the accountability, ensuring those tasks get done. And not just like talking to people to make sure they get done, but again, systems and processes to make sure they get done, right? Like, what does your task management system look like within your organization? How do we know if these things are getting done? An integrator will solve those types of problems. All right. So again, when we think about the difference here between visionary and integrator, visionaries tend to be very future thinking. So you're always kind of thinking about like, yeah, like this is where I want to get to. This is where we can be in 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, right? Big ideas. Conferences are exciting for you because you walk away with a lot of big ideas. You tend to be very passionate about those ideas. And you do a good job of casting like what needs to happen and why you want it to happen, right? But not necessarily the how. Versus integrators, again, they're going to be more focused on execution. Think of it like, the sergeant and the general in the military, right? A general is going to be like, hey, these are our marching orders. The sergeant is like, cool, I'll get us there. So again, we talked a lot about systems processes, keeping it very logical, and then answering the how and the when questions, right? How are we going to do this? When does each step need to happen? When will we achieve this objective? All right, so again, we have less than 10 minutes left here, so I'm going to keep us moving along so we can all learn how you might lose your real estate license today. All right, so my experience with an integrator, by the way, like I mentioned, I owned a property management company for 15 years. I had an integrator, and sneak peek, and I'll talk about this a little bit more here in just a couple of minutes, but my integrator lived in Romania. So she was a remote team member, and she managed my entire property management operation. She managed my other remote team members and my local team, not the other way around. And I want that to really sink in for you guys, because especially if you're here today and you're not using your remote team members, or it's kind of new to you, and maybe you just think like, oh yeah, they can just do admin, basic stuff. No, the US has not cornered the market on HR, okay? We're not the smartest people in the world. There's smart people everywhere in the world, okay? So, and now that same person who ran my property management company, she actually runs my business here now at Better Who. Now I'm one of the company owners, but I like to joke, not joke. She's actually my boss. She tells me what to do. So, and that's what you want. I really like that. So, that's kind of some of my story here. All right, so we talked a little bit about, your integrator can be global, and that can make it very cost effective for you, by the way. If you didn't know, your global team is typically going to cost about 25 to 35% of what you would pay for a local team member. Okay. By the way, everybody stop what you're doing. There is a resource that was promised to you as part of this talk, and I want to make sure you all get this resource. So go ahead and scan this QR code. This is going to give you like an actual plan of how to put things into place of everything that we're talking about today. So take a minute, make sure you grab this resource. I want you to have it. All right, so these are the barriers we already talked about. We talked about the integrator. Now I want to get to a little bit more of the how of how we get there with the integrator. So let me get to more of the how here. All right, so some things that you need to have success here, some of the stuff we've already talked about, right? You need leadership clarity. You need that financial visibility. You need your roles to be aligned, right people, right seats. You need to have, now you don't have to have your processes documented before you get an integrator, because that's going to be part of what they do, but that is one of the things that needs to happen. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about how to actually get an integrator on your team. So there's kind of three different paths to think about here. One is to promote internally. So maybe you have somebody that is in your organization right now that, based on everything I've told you, you're thinking, yeah, I actually kind of know who that person could be, even if they're not ready today, but you can kind of see in them the potential of getting to this place. And that's a great path to move forward with, right? And then you'll need a plan of, okay, what are they going to need to make this transition happen? And maybe it's something for some of you that could happen immediately. Maybe it will take a year for some of you guys, right? But you might have somebody on your team that exists today that could get into this position. You could just hire an integrator. Now, I will say that I've not seen this done that well when people try to just hire and put somebody in that seat right out of the gate. I've not seen that done very successfully. Even when you hire somebody that seems to have like just the right resume, they know what they're doing, you generally need a very slow, methodical, intentional plan to get that person into the position they need to get to, as opposed to just hiring them on day one, you're like, here's the deal. And that gets me to the third point, which is develop over time, right? So generally, like if you were gonna hire somebody today, I would say you wanna give yourself 6 to 12 months of getting this person to a place where they can be everything that I've described so far in this conversation. So let's talk a little bit about what that looks like. So if you are going to do that, where you hire somebody or you have somebody on your team and you want to get them to this place, then you want to start with some phased responsibility. So what do I mean by phased responsibility? Well, basically you want to give them exposure to every element of your business, right? Let them work in maintenance for a little while. Let them work in leasing for a little while. Let them work with the sales and marketing folks for a little while. Let them work with the finance stuff, right? So, roll that out, cascade that, let them get good at one thing. And one thing to really do with them is not just do the job. They may not even need to do the job at all. But they need to have exposure to it, and they need to be part of either developing the systems and processes around that function if they don't exist today, or helping improve them. And that's a great way to learn the job without even having to do the job. Clear metrics, again, we've talked a lot about that already with KPIs. And then progressive ownership, right? So don't just dump everything on them all at once. Be like, okay, cool, you can now take on this responsibility, and then add and layer that on as you go. So it's just kind of like I've been saying here, you're going to want to start small. Increasing authority is really important because this can create confusion for the rest of your team if you, as a key decision maker in your business, are not the one establishing their authority on their behalf, right? So you need to clearly communicate, and this goes for all of your organization, but you need to clearly communicate who has authority to do what over who over what tasks, so there's not confusion on your team of like, hey, who are you to tell me what to do, right? Like, you need to establish that. Okay, this again is that same QR code in case you didn't get it. So anybody didn't get it? Yeah, same one. Okay, and this kind of wraps us up here. So, so again, if you put some of these things in place, you align your leadership, you clarify your operations, and then that leads to scalability, which is the whole point of why we're here today. That if you don't do these things, I promise you, you're going to struggle to scale. You're going to struggle to scale. You're going to continue to be stunted. But there is a clear path to the scaling you want to achieve if you can get these things in place. I think I left us with like 60 to 90 seconds. Anybody have any questions for me? Yes.
I have a question.
Yes.
How do you think about the urgency around finding that role? Like how early, what size does it matter? Like if there's 2 people, it probably doesn't matter on your team as much.
Well, the urgency to find the role exists today. And like I said, even if there's only one person on your team, okay, the role exists. It would be helpful to document the role.
So to clarify, then,
yes.
It's a singular hat.
Oh, a singular hat. I would say it starts to become really relevant for sure by like around 250 single family units. Yep. Good clarifying question. Thank you. All right, anybody else?
What about for Airbnb properties? Like how many?
I don't want to be put on the spot and give a wrong answer. So you and I have already been talking, so we can talk more about that. Because I don't know if unit is actually the right way to think about that, or revenue might be the better way to think about that. So, all right, any other burning questions? Yes?
Do you have area of property management that you think is good to start, or is there a sequence of phased responsibilities in your mind that makes sense that stack well?
I always love to start with maintenance because maintenance tends to be one of the biggest pain points companies have regardless. Yeah, good question. All right, other questions? We're popcorning these things out. These are good questions. We still have like 20 seconds to go. Okay, all right, time's up. Thank you guys for being here. Really appreciate it.